A pleasant good evening. I am Dr. Daisley, certified life coach and host of 2firstdailyliferadio.com. Dr. Daisley Speaks. This evening, I have the pleasure of interviewing some amazing leaders. First of all, we have Bill Bellows. And second up, we're going to be talking to Christopher Chinapoo and Dr. Kevan Leach. I'm going to let them introduce themselves to you, the audience. So let's start with Bill. Bill, the floor is yours.
All right. Great to be with the three of you. Yeah, Bill Bellows, I'm here in Los Angeles. I'm trained as a mechanical engineer with a bachelor's, master's, and PhD in thermal science. Worked in the jet engine business for 7 years, the rocket engine business for 26 years, and along the way was introduced to the work of Junichi Taguchi, which I fell in love with, and then afterwards became a great admirer of Dr. Deming's work, Edward de Bono, and Russell Lakoff, and so retired from aerospace. I now teach online classes for 2 universities and consult, and that's my short story. Thanks.
Well, that's really fast, man. I hope we'll come back to you and you're going to give us some more details. Dr. Kevan, how are you doing?
I'm very well. Really great to see you this evening, Adrian and Bill, and glad Chris is on the line as well.
Exactly.
I have to say, Bill, I didn't know you'd studied mechanical engineering. I went down the same route, mechanical engineering, with a lot of fluid mechanics and aeronautics as well. Then went off to do a master's in control engineering and a PhD. I then spent a little time working for oil companies, American oil companies, but then was snapped up by one of Britain's largest food companies, where I went off to design special instrumentation for baking processes, a lot of which we exported back. We owned Keebler at the time in the States, Bill, and exported quite a lot of it back to Keebler. I moved on from that company and was IT director for a business and engineering director. And then about 2000 set up my own business, and I've been consulting in the food industry for the last 20 odd years, mainly in the States, the Middle East, Europe, and my last 3 clients were all based in Tokyo.
Wow. And we have Christopher on the line. None of this would have been possible if Mr. Christopher Chinapoo, my good friend, didn't make that connection. Christopher, how are you doing this evening?
Well, great. Can't complain too much. You know, I'm in an illustrious company of yourself, Dr. Bill Bellows and Dr. Leach, who I consider to be 2 of my mentors in, you know, this whole journey, this lifelong journey in terms of learning and adopting and applying the principles of profound knowledge. You know, as Bill would have mentioned, you know, just trying to apply these concepts of Dr. Deming is a continual process. You never actually know enough. It is a continual journey. And well, a little bit about my background. Well, as you would know, I come from a pure quality management background, of course, holding a ASQ certified quality manager, organizational excellence. I'm also a certified quality auditor, and of course a chartered quality professional member of the CQI, and also a member of the DEMSIG with Dr. Leach and others. Well, of course, you know, I've been working in corrections, I've been working in the energy sector, I've been working in the food management sector, I've been facilitating organizations in relation to trade of both goods and services within the region, within the EU, within the United States and others, and just continue to work in the application in terms of seeing a culture of quality for all. That's really part of my ambition, and that's why I have continually sat at the feet of those that can mentor me, such as Dr. Bellows, Dr. Leach, and a whole host of others who really help to, you know, bring to life the principles and practices of Dr. Deming, which I'm certain we will discuss during the call.
Well, I want to first of all thank each and every one of you for joining us. This program is designed to inform, educate, and inspire the public by sharing the stories of leaders in their own sectors, connecting people, cultures, and resources as we are faced with intersecting issues, problems moving our world forward. Many leaders in education, health, business, technology, innovation, culture, youth development, and sports are being connected to us so that we can not only share their stories but bring their information to the general public. Although many organizations and governments talk about inclusion, and we talk about development and moving people forward, sometimes we are met with barriers, and that's why this program is designed to help us navigate the terrain of leadership in the 21st century. Is Mr. Christopher Chinapoo. He served as the education chairman for the Human Development and Leadership Division of the American Society for Quality, and is the immediate past secretary of the Caribbean Area Network for Quality Assurance in Tertiary Education. He also served as the American Corrections Association Research Council, International Affairs Committee, Standards Committee. He is currently the chairman of the Technical Oversight Committee to the CARICOM Secretariat for 10 EDF Fund in Crime and Violence. Bill serves as the chairman of the Deming Medal Committee for the American Society of Quality and is a columnist for the UK Lean Management Journal. Bill was a former deputy director, previously served as an associate trustee on the board of the Deming Institute. He was employed by Aerojet Rocketdyne as an associate technical fellow, focusing on thinking about thinking with applicability to design and development and production of liquid rocket engines in a 26-year career that spanned ownership of Rocketdyne by Rockwell International, Boeing, United Technologies, Aerojet. Bill provided insights to advantages of thinking, learning, and working together. Bill taught also at Northwestern University. He earned his Bachelor's of Science, Master's of Science, and his PhD in Mechanical Engineering from the Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in Troy, New York. Dr. Kevan Leach started his career undertaking an apprenticeship as a specialist machine tool maker to the vehicle supplier sector. He later studied at Lancaster Polytechnic, Coventry University, graduating as a mechanical engineer. Also, further studied at Bradford in the School of Control Engineering, led to a master's in control systems and a PhD following his period of academic study. Dr. Kevan joined one of Britain's largest food groups to develop automation systems and instruments for food manufacturing processes work, which lead to a number of patents, and he'll tell us about that as well. And at this time, it is my great honor and privilege to have these great guys in front of us, not only to talk about their work, but to give us some insight into management. So far, gentlemen, most quality managers, engineers that I have met talk about the Deming method or philosophy. Can you tell us more about this philosophy, its process, and where did it come from?
Who wants to go first?
Oh, dear. Where do you want to start? Yes.
Where exactly?
Yeah.
That question can actually be the entire history of quality. But anyone who wants to go first, I'll give way.
Yeah, feel free.
Okay, I'll kick the ball off then. I guess really it started when Dr. Deming was introduced to Walter Shewhart, and around the early 20s, when Walter Shewhart was working on why, no matter how hard they tried, no two products would turn out the same, and sometimes the harder they tried, the worse it got. And it's all credit to Dr. Shewhart. Two things really, I think. The first one is that he understood the concept of variation, and not just understanding the concept of variation, but there were two types of variation. The first is assignable cause. Generally, we would think of that coming from outside the system, but not necessarily so. And common cause. And the way you deal with both of those needs to be done in a slightly different way. But also, if you go back over the papers, Walter Schuhart actually started the first of the PDSA cycles. They're actually looking at understanding what you've got, measuring, then applying a way to test that, taking some action, but then standing back and having a look. Did we make things better? Did we make things worse?
Yeah.
That was later picked up by Dr. Deming and became, they call it the Deming cycle, but it started there. And later in the 50s, Dr. Deming exported that, along with Duran and others, into Japan after the Second World War.
Right. I heard that during my research, I found out that Toyota employed this concept. Why do you think that the company Toyota found this concept so necessary to implement in Japan?
I think there are a number of things, and we have to go back to basically, and it really was all in America originally during the first part of World War. If you go back to the New York shipyards in World War I, there was a lot of work done on quality. And then for the start of the outbreak of World War II, it was realized by a number of people, Dooley and the other three horsemen, as they're called, realized that if you were going to be sending younger people into conflict, then you would need, in order to keep your economy going and production lines, you would need to bring people in. So they built a concept originally called training for work within industry.
Okay.
And that became the cornerstone of training American people to work in industry to build things.
Yes.
Built on top of that was some work by Charles Allen, and that was Charles Allen's four-step method. And if you take, and also within that work, they produced some things called J cards or job cards. They were things like, how do you prepare to train somebody? How do you train? They also had in there, how do you manage people? How do you prepare to manage people? And if you look at PDCA cycle, that all fits in with Charles Allen's four-step method and fits in with the TWI training. That formed a big basis of what was exported to Japan at the end of the Second World War and in the early 50s. And indeed, the interesting bit is, if you have a look at the job cards as they were in 1945 from TWI, they're almost identical to the job cards carried around now by people in the Toyota plant.
Right.
There was also another part in there where some of the American officers were teaching statistics to Mitsubishi Group. And one of them stood up and said, this is all statistics. And they began to realize that what the Americans were teaching them and what the Americans had used very successfully was all part of that process. It nearly did go the other way. It nearly didn't actually become what we now understand as the TPS or their production systems. But I think in the end, the understanding of the logic of that and the way in which those systems operate was what tipped it over the edge. But hey, it's all there. It's all in the Library of Congress. The Americans actually invented the system.
Now, what correlation does the Japanese management Kaizen method have to do with this? Is it another Lean Sigma?
But before you even go into Kaizen, I think that one of the things that we also need to recognize too, that a lot of persons, we talk of the Deming management method, but
Yes.
it more be about thinking than a method,
Okay.
right? And
Okay.
it also represents an evolution of thought and an application of quality management principles and practices as they evolve through history. Because
Right.
what would have happened too is that in Dr. Deming's initial teachings, he also was evolving, coming down to his last work, that is actually captured in the New York economics. So he didn't actually start off as what we call the system of profound knowledge, right? Which is as I mentioned in the last interview that we did, the four elements which are not taken separately but are four interactive elements taken together in terms of appreciation for a system, knowledge of variation, theory of knowledge, and psychology, right? These are not four separate things in teaching as it evolves through the years. Another key thing that is also necessary to understand that quite often people may actually talk about utilizing Deming's teachings, but they may not actually be, totally consistent with Deming, because what has happened too is that as the Deming teachings has evolved too, so too did what we call Taylorism, and scientific management. And
now you're getting into an area that
the breaking up into parts and things like that. So those things are also part of that history and that evolution of quality. And quite often, a lot of what happened too is a lot of breaking off of certain pieces of Deming's thought and teachings, such as and Schuart's teachings, such as the statistical process control and the use of SPC, but combining it with what may be considered to be very harmful practices, because it was not taken in the context of an appreciation for the system, or even an appreciation for the system of profound knowledge in terms of how people are managed, and that return to pride in workmanship and stuff like that. Another key thing to me in Deming's work too, and evolution, is that whole out of crisis, and the introduction of the 14 management points, where even within the 14 management points, no single point basically stood alone. So, even before the discussion on Kaizen, I just wanted to kind of bring that, kind of picture also into focus.
Well, you guys are the professionals here. I'm waiting patiently to hear from Bill. Dr. Bellows, your wing.
What?
I'm waiting to hear from you.
Okay. Well, let me just add to what Kevan and Chris said, that because when you asked about Deming, the only question is, how far back do you go?
Yeah.
Yes. Well, the motivation for asking about Deming is simply because the general audience doesn't really know. They may know, for example, the scientific method, Taylorism, but they might not have thought about Deming, haven't gotten that far yet. Only academics who join us may know about it. So I'm trying to bridge the gap between us and them and make the information as relevant as possible.
Yeah,
so you can go as far back as possible.
To Schuart. You can go back to 1900 when he was born. Born in the middle of nowhere and grew up in northwest Wyoming, and grew up in a community that
One second.
Where Deming grew up in a community of quilting bees, barn raised northwest Wyoming, and he saw an environment where people worked together, lived together, with a lot of collaboration. The number one crop, the number one business at that time in the early 1900s when his father moved the family to northwest Wyoming, was a growing of sugar beets. And what Deming experienced growing up is, I mean, the fields all around the town he grew up in were filled with sugar beets. The water came from a nearby dam that was very new, so this bringing water was growing sugar beets was, I don't know why they selected sugar beets, but several hours south of there in Denver was the major buyer of the sugar beets. And what's growing up that he talked about is full-page ads in the newspaper with advice to the farmers on when to plant the beets, when to thin the beets, when to harvest them. When I went there, 1997, the economy is still sugar beets, but it's no longer horse-drawn carriages. So Deming saw collaboration. And then what I'd like to add to what these friends said is that so Deming went to Japan in 1950, introduced them to one is the idea of production viewed as a system, the idea that you have inputs, things coming in, and then those are transformed from raw materials into a product out to a consumer. And then what's unique about Deming's model is not only did the stuff go out to a consumer, what he told the Japanese is you want to watch the product being used and take ideas from its use to rethink the product. So it's not just get the things out the door and we're done. And so that model of watching how your products are used is a big part of Deming's work, and I don't think it shows up in many others when they talk about quality. The other thing I want to say is, as Kevan said, is he introduced them to statistics and as Chris said as well, statistical process control, understanding variation, different types of variation. But another thing I wanted to point out is the TWI efforts that Kevan referenced and the early aspects of what people today would call the Toyota production system or lean, where people give a lot of credit to Taiichi Ohno, who is a Japanese industrial engineer employed by Toyota. There's another Japanese industrial engineer who's employed by Toyota as a consultant by the name of Shigeru Shindo. And the two of them brought in ideas from industrial engineering that are largely the thinking of Frederick Winslow Taylor going back to the early 1900s. And so what people were saying to me, when I worked for the Deming Institute, they'll say, well, how come the lean folks in the Toyota production system folks don't talk about Deming? And I've spent several hours scouring Toyota's Toyota production system website, and I can't find anything on that website. I can't find a word, a phrase, an expression that I could say, Adrian, you see this word here, you see this expression here, you see this reference, that's Deming. There's nothing on that page which is Deming, because it's not Deming. It predates Deming, and it's the work of Shingo and Taiichi Ohno. And so, as Kevan said, when Deming came in, he got exposed Japan, not just Toyota, to fundamental concepts and understanding variation. But the other thing I want to point out is, and I think it's a really neat story, and I don't know if, I'm sure Chris has heard it, Adrian, I don't know if you've heard it, and Kevan, I don't know if you've heard it, but a great book on Toyota that I'll just throw up Against All Odds. Mm-hmm. The reason I was looking for a book about Toyota written by insiders, because I believe the outsiders are limited by what they can see, because we have filters that don't allow us to see. So I wanted to read a book about Toyota from an insider, not that they don't have filters too, but one account in there that I found very intriguing is in 1950, so we're talking several years after World War II, Toyota's just getting into a commercially successful car, which in the late 40s, their cars were taxi cabs. They weren't selling them to individuals, they were taxi cabs. And then when it got into cars bought by people in the early 50s, well, in 1950, the good news is, through the work of Taiichi Ohno, Shigeru Shingo, The cars were going out the door at phenomenal speed. That's the good news. The bad news, according to this book, is that Toyota couldn't fix them as fast as they could sell them. So they had figured out how to get them out the door, and so the young engineer within Toyota who was assigned the problem of improving the quality was a guy by the name of Shishiro Toyota, who's in his early 90s. His father started Toyota Motor Company. His grandfather started Toyota Loom Company. The original Toyota company made looms for making cloth. His son said, "Dad, we got to get into the automobile business." His son was assigned the project. We just can't make this work. And what's really cool, the punchline is, he became inspired. Shishiro Toyota became greatly inspired by Deming, brought in statisticians, university professors to teach them statistics, right? Back to Kevin's point, statistics. And the Taiichi Ohno folks were laughing at them and ridiculing them. And so Shishiro Toyota is quoted in the book as saying, yes, young people on his staff came to him because the Taiichi Ohno folks were saying that we're going to get fired because they don't see our efforts are contributing. And Shishiro Toyota's comment was, if you get fired, I get fired. So, and I think, so I have no doubt that Deming has contributed to Toyota's success, but not as explained by the Toyota production system. I don't know who have we lost.
I don't think you've lost anybody actually, Bill, at the end of it. I think I might take just a slightly different view in all of that. In that you were right about them being a loom business, first of all, and they did spend a lot of time looking at ways of producing automatic looms, because their looms stopped if a thread broke. The whole point behind it, I think it was Kichiro Toyoda, who was the guy who actually travelled to America and then went to Platts in the UK to understand loom production, but couldn't find any automatic looms. So what they were doing already was that they had a huge element of quality built into the output of the product, in that they were trying to make their machines not produce defective material.
Oh yeah, no, I'll accept that, but I would say the Toyota's success is due to many contributions. And I'm not discounting Shishiro Toyota, or I'm not discounting Shigeru Shingo and Taiichi Ohno. What I'm saying is that Dr. Deming's work is far more than that. I mean, if you look deeply, and you don't have to look deeply, if you do a cursory look at Six Sigma quality or lean or operational excellence, what you'll find is that they define quality. So we just look at how is quality defined. They look at a product, and they take a product, an automobile or a loom, and break it down into components, and then within them subcomponents, and every element when produced is configured to meet a set of requirements. And the traditional definition of quality is to look at the subscale level of all those pieces, and do they meet their predetermined requirements. And there's only two answers to that question, yes or no to meet the requirements. What Dr. Deming began to understand in the late 50s is that there's variation in how requirements are met. In the variation, he began to realize in the late 60s when he met in the late 50s when he met Dr. Taguchi, began to realize that when you integrate these components which are good, the variation in their goodness has a consequence at integration. And that general understanding you will not find, you're not going to find that explanation in very many places today. I mean, I mentioned, as Adrian mentioned, Rocketdyne I worked for 26 years, for 9 of those years owned by Boeing. Boeing's advanced quality system, which is considered aerospace standard, is not much than how every organization defines quality, which is to look at the subcomponents, the rivets, the holes, the pieces, the shims, and do they meet requirements. That thinking of meeting requirements goes back 200 years. What Deming is doing today is looking at the variation, as Kevan mentioned, but looking at the impact of the variation and how these things come together.
Yes, I mean, what we're basically saying, Bill, is adherence to specifications is not good enough.
That leads me to my second question. How relevant is the Deming method for the 21st century leader? Only you guys can answer that question. So,
I'd say the relevance depends. If you care about integration in how things come together within your organization, or how your products or services integrate with others downstream, then I'm not aware of any other management philosophy that looks at the variation in how requirements are met in terms of how that variation affects integration.
Yeah.
So it's important to think there are opportunities to improve integration. And I think most organizations, and I've got plenty of stories, they treat integration, the integration effort, as a given and don't challenge it. And I'll give you one example, then turn over to Kevan. And read an account of a Ford plant in the late 1960s, and the plant manager shared that whenever they did final assembly, rubber mallets were used to bang together the mating parts. They didn't quite fit. And every now and then, 2 parts went together without a mallet, and the Ford plant referred to no mallet required as a snap fit integration. And it happened now and then. Well, they went off and bought competitors' cars, took them apart just to see how they integrated. And one of the cars they took apart in the late 60s, most assembled just like theirs. So I would venture their conclusion was just like ours, just like ours, just like ours, just like ours. Well, one of them, they reported back to the plant manager, who was the visionary behind this, one competitor's product assembled without mallets. The entire thing was 100% snap fit. He did not believe the results. He had them take it apart and do it again. They did. He then got excited, bought out someone from Ford corporate headquarters and said, "You got to come see this." The Ford executive came out, met with the team, and his response to the team was, and I quote, "The customer will never notice the difference." That assembly plant manager was so frustrated by how that executive interpreted what was a Toyota pickup truck's final assembly without mallets. He went on to work at Xerox and brought this thinking to Xerox. I would say back to your question is that if you're spending a lot of time banging things together, then the Deming philosophy may be relevant.
I will go another route. I will go another route also. I would ask the question, if we believe that is innovation important to an organization today? Is an organization fulfilling its purpose important to an organization today? Is satisfying customer needs and continuing to sustain your organization important to your organization today? Is improving your system of work important? Is assuring your employees and staff have joy in and pride in workmanship important? Is dealing with the issues of complexity important? Is really understanding your system? Because there's a lot of dysfunctional thinking around what is a system, how can a system be improved, right? And a lot of us approach system improvement by fixing the parts or fixing processes within that system that may actually work at the detriment of the whole. So if we find that the answer to these questions is how we treat and respect people important, is how do we bring together ideas and think about our thinking important. If these things are actually important, we recognize that the Deming philosophy is as important today, probably even more important today than it ever was. And what we may find too is that when we examine most quality approaches, is that they take out the Deming philosophy in piecemeal approaches. So we take out the plan, do, check, act cycles, we take out the Deming 14 points, and we may reject certain practices within the 14 points and so on. But also, if we believe that long-term vision or constancy of purpose is important to an organization as opposed to thinking in silos and focusing on short-term thinking. Once we recognize these things are important, we will recognize, to me, that the Deming philosophy is very important. I'll stop there for the while. I don't know if Kevan had any inputs into that.
Well, yes, I do, because I think just picking up what Bill was saying and he was alluding to, and I think it goes to another piece of work by somebody called Yoshida, and that's really the difference between desirability and acceptability. And very much, if you think in terms of we've made this to specification, and let's not misunderstand that specification on components is a bit of a horse trading affair. You know, the designers will want one set of limits, manufacturing will say we can't do that at an economic cost, and so there's a bit of horse trading goes on. But in the end, a compromise is reached, and we make it to, components are made to a specification. Problem is that given your processes, there will always be variation, and the tolerances on two parts that have to fit together will move around. And there are, depending on how you've drawn that and how good you are at manufacturing, then sometimes those limits will overlap and you're going to need a hammer fit, and sometimes those limits won't overlap. It will fall apart too easily, and sometimes they'll be just right. It's a bit like the porridge in the children's story, you know. The trick is that adherence to specifications is not enough, and it is about understanding the variation, but it is all of that in the product when it's put to use, not in the individual components. And I think if Deming teaches us anything, it is, as you said earlier, Bill, it's production as a system, but production as a system with a customer at the focus of it. And it doesn't matter what you think about it in the plant. It's really what the customer thinks about it and how they use that product in the end of the day that really defines the quality in the end. And it's that businesses need to be cognizant of. And I think a lot of businesses are not. And I'm going to lead that on to another point, which is that many businesses think that quality is a cost.
Yeah.
They think that it costs us money to make a higher quality product. And I think what they fail seeing that, and what we also get out of people who've gone further with this, like the GPS, is that it's actually an enabler. It enables you to do things that you couldn't do before, and enables you to take cost out. And it actually, in the end of the day, is the higher the quality is lower cost. Because as Deming once said, bad parts don't come free. Somebody made them and somebody was paid for them. So you're paying somebody to make scrap product. Why would you want to do it?
I wanted to plug there, and we got a comment coming to the chat. Good evening, panel. Someone mentioned the 14 management points. What are these points? Can you please explain?
Yeah. I think that, and bear out with me, Bill, if you agree with this. I think that Dr. Deming was getting very frustrated at some points at the way in which his ideas were, shall we say, being listened to in a very Far Eastern environment, and were not being listened to in an environment much closer to home. And he produced two things, really. He produced his 14 points for management, which were a set of rules by which you should, it's really trying to keep them focused in the right direction. But he also produced his deadly diseases, which is if you keep doing these, then you will very rapidly damage your business and damage your customer base. So I think that you've got to look at both of those together. You're looking quizzical there, Bill.
Well, I would say a couple of things come to mind. Is one, I agree with you, Kevin, is that I think to look at Deming's work as a means to improve quality, and then quality as expense is not uncommon, but I think it's inappropriate. To snap fit, let me just clarify that we produced designs at Rocketdyne and a number of rocket engines that were 100% snap fit. But the only thing that made it worthwhile is that the effort to do so was an incredible investment opportunity. What was saved was millions of dollars were saved by focusing their efforts in that way. And if the money's not being saved, then you just don't go there. In other words, you don't.
No, absolutely. Yeah.
Behind snap fit is not to achieve snap fit to achieve snap fit. The idea is that if banging things together with hammers is an expedient way to make money, then keep doing it. What we found is that designs we wanted to do could not be fabricated for the prices and the volumes we were talking about, and snap fit became an incredible opportunity. Relative to the 14 points of deadly diseases, those are vintage 1980s explanations of Deming, things to do, things not to do. But they're offered, and Deming's frustration with them in hindsight is that they became very prescriptive, and what he moved his work towards in terms of the system of profound knowledge in his last book, The New Economics, was not giving people a list of things to do and not to do, which he found to be grossly mismanaged. He wanted to give them a philosophy. The other thing I want to say is, relative to what Chris said, in terms of the need for innovation, blah blah blah, and I would say there's not. I think much of what Chris suggested that the Deming philosophy does offer, you could easily offer, is covered by operational excellence, TWI, Lean, Six Sigma, and all the others. And so what I'd say is, my explanation is, if you want to differentiate Deming from all of those others, then you don't say it's about continuous improvement, because all the others will say, we do that. If you say it's about the use of system process control, they'll say, well, we do that too. If you say it's about improving worker morale, many could claim other ways of doing that. my way of explaining it is, if what Deming's talking about uniquely is how to improve integration, and what I don't see any of the others talking about is improving integration. And the other thing I want to say is that integration in a given industry is a different word. And so in the food processing, that may mean mix the ingredients, right? At Rocketdyne, integration could mean welding, it could mean assembly. So I would find is given industries have different words for things coming together, and that's how I would explain Deming's work is it can allow you to potentially make that a more worthwhile money-making operation than currently.
I want to, if Dr. Leach doesn't have a comment to make at this point in time, because I can read the body language. It seems like he's eager up to say something. So go ahead. I can't see Chris.
I'm going to say just an interesting extension to that, Bill. Bill, I think that towards the end, Dr. Deming was at pains not to give a list or a prescription of things, and he was very much about the philosophy. And because he was teaching a philosophy, it was up to others to interpret it for themselves. There's a great phrase around that you can't copy without theory, and just copying from other people isn't going to solve it for you.
Yeah.
You know, you're a different organisation, you work and think in different ways. It's how you take the philosophy and integrate it into who you are and who your customers are that is important, and therefore prescriptive, such as 7 diseases or whatever else. They're useful in general, so you don't fall off the straight and narrow, but they're not there as absolute prescriptive remedies that do this and you'll get that sort of thing.
Yeah, and he learned the hard way.
Yes.
And that's why I think, depending on where you study Deming and what books you read, you could easily conclude, I'm doing lean, I'm already doing that. I'm doing Six Sigma, I'm already doing that. I'm doing operational excellence, I'm already doing that. And I don't deny that is a very likely conclusion. I don't agree with it, but I think it takes a while to understand that, and I don't think people have the patience for that.
If I leave this on then, I hope I'm not drifting this away for you, Adrian. Why do you think they don't have the patience, Bill?
Oh, that's a great question, Kevin. In my experience, and I'm sure you must have seen it as well, you have people within your respective organizations that are subject matter experts in heat transfer, machine design, whatever it is, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they've got a job to do, and then you're trying to get their attention. And what I found at Rocketdyne, you're working with really smart people in any industry. They want to know, and I think a lot of the training people take in industry is a waste of time. I think you've got training, I'm sure you've seen, Kevan, which is required, ethics training, and you got a bunch of training which is nothing more than once a year take ethics training. I'm not saying this training is not important, but I think most of the training that people take in corporations is obligatory. Sign the roster at the beginning, sign the roster at the end, and we'll see you next year. And I think they're so busy doing what they're doing that you've got to find a way to grab their attention. And I'm sure, as you found, you have a few people in the organization who would come to you and say, Kevan, this is brilliant. But the majority are busy.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And they're busy with incredible requirements, getting things done, juggling. And I think in the time you have to get their attention, it's really hard to grasp them. The strategy we had at Rocketdyne was, going back to variation, is there anyone we could catch, and then could we work with them to achieve results that would help get the others' attention? And I think the sad thing is people are too busy knowing what they know.
I think you're absolutely right. And if you take some of the hard sciences, then the hard sciences are taught and delivered pretty much in a deterministic way. Yes, but we're living in a probabilistic world, and there you have a dilemma.
Yes, we are. But here's one for you, Kevin. So you would have taken in your training Fluids 1, right?
I'm sorry, I missed that, Bill.
Taken in your training an introductory class to fluid mechanics, right? You would have taken a fluid.
Broke up, Bill. I thought you were saying fluid mechanics. Yes, I would. We would have done all the usual stuff, the Noether's equation, all that sort of stuff. Yeah.
How many times did you take the Intro to Fluid Mechanics class?
Given my lecturers, about once a term and once a semester.
No, but my point is, we both know people that attended a Deming seminar more than once.
Oh yes, I agree.
The thing is, find me somebody who went to college and took a Calculus 1 twice. Take a course once.
Yeah.
And the idea, I mean, so when, and the whole idea that you could, then you get locked into this model of, why would I take calculus more than once? Why would I take strength materials more than once? Why would I take a Deming seminar more than once? Because there's more to know. Convincing people that there's more to know. There's one for you, Kevin.
Well, you're absolutely right, but you can bring it closer to home, Bill. How many times do people watch a movie because they learn more from the movie? It's exactly the same thing. Yes, you see it in a different light. And it's your change in understanding and the development of your experiences that help you see it in a different light and help you see the nuances that are sitting there just below the surface.
And I use that strategy with people. I always say to them, you watch Star Wars again and again, come to class again. But it takes a special person to give you that patience, that has that patience with you.
I would like to ask that in the next minute we're going to switch topics. So you have 15 seconds to give your conclusions.
So, all right, so I'm going to give a quick conclusion on the 14 points. So the 14 points may actually seem to be 14 points, but they're actually one singular point. Because again, they are all interactions. Just as the system of profound knowledge is not 4 different elements, but is actually one element that is actually taken together. So if anything, like Bill, I do agree that in the quality field, we have been practicing a lot of separation, where we need to actually practice a lot of integration and focus on the interactions. And we also need to recognize, to me, what makes actually Deming's thinking and philosophy different is that it's not really necessarily about being prescriptive, but it's about actually a map of theory that really helps you to think and to bring people together, to work together towards that sort of refinement in thinking and evolution. So there's a continuous learning, more than a continuous improvement. There's a continuous learning that becomes a part of, that method. So there's really no right sizing and no wrong sizing. You really have to continue evolving around this whole issue of working together.
If I'm going to pick up a couple of things here and then extend the subject. You'd like me to do that. I'm just picking up Bill's point, which is 2 things really. One, never give up a thirst for knowledge. as Deming would say, even in the 90s, can I learn too? Can I be here with you and learn as well? And it's very important, because while you have that quest for knowledge, going back, repeating the course is exciting, because you know you're going to find out something else. And I would extend that on, Bill, into one other thing that I think is a great element in the TPS, which is A3 thinking for problem solving, and where Toyota spend a lot of time engaging everyone in the business to learn how to solve problems, no matter whatever level it is. It's out of a lot of respect for people, but it's about engaging people in thinking and problem solving, and they have a mechanism for that. So that, I mean, any business in the world is buffeted by a lot of things that happen to it. If you leave all the problem solving just with one group of people, they could very easily just run out of ability to solve all the problems. If you engage all the people in the business, engaged in working for the business and helping to solve business problems, you're going to need a completely different structure inside the business. The standard ones you see in Schulte's group or the others, they're not going to work very well. You're going to need a different way of doing it, but you're engaging and focusing everybody, and I think everybody needs to be customer facing as well. Great book by Jan Carlson with a Z about that. Yeah, Moments of Truth. Yeah.
Final thoughts, Bill?
No, what the other thing that comes to mind is amongst the most frequently requested articles from the Harvard Business Review are one more time, how do you motivate people?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But another very, very popular reprint is teaching smart people how to learn. Your point is that, but you're right. The challenge is, it's like in our entire lives, there are things we get fascinated about, whether it's watching Star Wars movies, and you know, working on motorcycles, improving how we ride bikes. And so I think everyone has a fascination in improving their understanding of something. It's a question of, is that excitement relative to what they do at work?
Right.
Anyone that gives up learning, and this is what Ed Baker at Ford saw, people leave the Ford plant and then spend all weekend working on their cars, having a great deal of fun doing that. And so it's not that we don't have a passion for learning. The question is, does our place of employment create an environment that we on Sunday night are anxious to go back to, or dreading going back to?
Actually, yep. I would like to, so now that we have concluded the first hour, all right, when we come back, we're going to be talking about leadership. And we're going to be having a very light conversation. This interview was designed to be a light conversation. You guys are doing fantastic. So just bear with us. We'll be back with you shortly.